Out of depths unknown, the spark of life ignites as we are born. We enter a world, a universe, not of our own making. Our lives unfold in mystery and wonder. Questions abound for which there are no definite answers. And so we gather in community to seek in one another assurance and recognition and compassion and strength. We gather in community to be reminded of what is most ultimate and what is most sacred. In this spirit of searching and of reverence, let us worship together. Please rise in body or in spirit for our opening hymn, Now Light is Less, number 54 in your gray hymnal. Be seated. I would invite Kay Bennett forward for the morning's poem.
O Light Invisible by T.S. Eliot. In our rhythm of earthly life, we tire of light. We are glad when the day ends, when play ends, and ecstasy is too much pain. We are children quickly tired, children who are up in the night and fall asleep when the rocket is fired, and the day is long for work or play. We tire of distraction or concentration. We sleep and are glad to sleep, controlled by the rhythm of blood and the day and the night and the seasons. And we must extinguish the candle, put out the light and relight it. Forever must quench, forever relight the flame. Therefore we thank thee for our little light that is dappled with shadow. We thank thee who has moved us to building, to finding, to forming at the ends of our fingers and beams of our eyes. And when we have built an altar to the invisible light, we may set thereon the little lights for which our bodily vision is made. And we thank thee that darkness reminds us of light. O light invisible, we give thee thanks for thy great glory.
Thank you, Kay. At a recent meeting with some of my ministerial colleagues, we spent some time talking about our dreams. Well, in doing so, we noticed that many of us had similar recurring dreams. For example, several of us had those anxiety dreams where it's time for the final exam. And with a sick feeling, you realize you haven't been to any of the classes. And you don't even know where the class is being held. Well, for me, that final exam dream has morphed into the dream where it's almost time for the worship service to begin. I can't find my sermon. And even worse, I haven't even begun writing it yet. Well, another common recurring dream that we talked about is that fear of exposure dream. The I'm really feeling vulnerable dream, in which you're in a crowd and you look down and you realize that you're naked, or that you're standing in front of a group and you're only partially dressed. Any of you ever had that dream? Yeah. Well, it comes quite frequently to me, which indicates, I guess, how vulnerable I seem, how vulnerable I feel sometimes. You know, another dream, one that comes to me more than I'd like to admit is one where I'm going through some kind of shift in my life. It's one of those archetypal dreams, but not as common as the final exam dream or the naked dream. It's the dream that usually goes like this. I'm in my house, and I discover a door that I've never noticed before. And when I open that door, I find this room that I never knew was there. Well, usually the feeling upon discovering this room is not only confusion, but surprise and pleasure, because when I go into that room I've never seen before, I find that the room is large, it's expansive, it's filled with light, it smells fresh, clean, and I'm delighted to discover that I have more room to live in than I thought I had. Have you ever had that dream? You know, usually this specific dream will come during a time of great challenge in my life, a time when I've been startled out of complacency, perhaps by something that's happened in my life. Often it's a time when I'm struggling, when I'm being forced to think more deeply about my life. And when I awaken from this dream, I'm not feeling like I do when I've had a nightmare. I don't wake up with a pounding heart, feeling terrified or sick, but instead I'm delighted. I'm somehow comforted. Because what I've come to know about these dreams is that they are not about my house. They're not about the place where I'm living. They're about me. They're about all the parts of me. All those parts that remain hidden away. Those things I haven't a clue about, that I don't even know are there. And what these dreams remind me of is that there's not only more space inside of me than I usually acknowledge, that there are not only more doors waiting to be found, that there are more rooms waiting to be explored, but that when I do open the door and enter these rooms, I'll find a place of light, a place that smells fresh, clean. Saint Teresa of Avila, a 16th century Christian mystic, she also had a dream sort of like this, although it was much more complex and profound than my dream. Hers was a vision in which she saw the soul as a beautiful crystal bowl in the shape of a castle. Inside this castle were mansions, and inside each mansion were hundreds of rooms, opening into one another. In St. Teresa's vision, there was a darkness surrounding the castle, a darkness that contained all kinds of foul things like toads and vipers and venomous creatures. But inside that castle, inside the soul, those disgusting things, those sinful things were not to be found. Instead, what she saw was a way to move through these rooms, through each mansion, getting closer and closer all the time to the mansion found at the very center of the castle. Well, as this journey progressed, or in her vision, more and more light filled each room until the final mansion was found. And in this mansion, the one at the very center, she found pure light, because this is where God was found. St. Teresa was one of those women so long ago who found their ways into the convents, and it was there that they were able to live in ways that were very different from their sisters outside of the walls. These women were able to devote their lives to study, to music, to writing, to prayer, something very different from many of their contemporaries living in the 16th century. And among these women in the convents, there were a handful who were true mystics, who were able to apprehend the mystery of life a little more fully than the rest of us. St. Teresa was one of these great Christian mystics. Now, the thing that I find fascinating about St. Teresa's vision of the Crystal Castle is that she sees God at the center of the castle, at the center of the soul. God isn't up there someplace, totally removed, totally other, but is instead at the center of the soul. Pure light, there at the center. What's fascinating about this for me is that we Unitarian Universalists have had a similar vision for centuries now. This was one of the things that distinguished us from traditional and Orthodox Christians, because the Unitarians and the Universalists didn't believe that the soul was tainted with original sin. Instead, our religious forebears believed that the soul was basically good, filled with light, containing a divine spark. It is this basic belief that has led us to believe that each of us is filled with infinite possibilities, that each of us is capable of infinite good, of infinite love, that we're not dark and sinful inside, in need of punishment, needing to have things beaten out of us. A couple of years ago, WBUR hosted a conversation about the Huttites, who are descendants of the Anabaptists and live in closed communities in the Pacific Northwest. Well, one of the women speaking on BUR had lived with her family in a Huttite community for a while and was describing the way in which her children had responded to being there. She said her little one loved it because she was nurtured and embraced with unconditional love by those caring for her. But her son, who I believe she said was 5 or 6, had a different experience. Because by that age, in their belief and practice, the child's will has to be broken down. Her obedience is the goal. It was clear to me in listening to her that the basic belief of these people must be that humanity is basically flawed. That we are sinful creatures, depraved, rotten to the core. Now, once in a while, we'll hear about an extreme case in which children are beaten in order to drive out the devil, to break their wills. But we see this same understanding permeating our whole culture when the assumption is made that people, if given a choice, will do the selfish or self-serving or dishonest or even the cruel thing. And therefore, there must be strict laws governing people's behavior and swift and consistent punishment in order to keep people in line. That we do the right thing, it's not because it's the right thing to do, but out of a fear that we'll be punished if we don't. That it's only fear of punishment that keeps us on the straight and narrow. But this has not been the understanding of Unitarians and Universalists for centuries. Instead, we have believed that there's a basic goodness at the center of each person. And that if this basic goodness is carefully and gently nurtured, infinite possibilities will emerge. That we will do the right thing, not out of fear, but because it is our nature to do so. At least when we are aware of and in touch with the best parts of ourselves. And this seems to be consistent with the vision that St. Teresa had as well. That at the center of the soul is pure light. This is where God dwells. I do believe this, although it's hard to remember sometimes. When we think or we do things that we're ashamed of, things that are thoughtless. It's tempting to think that we must be pretty miserable people. When we feel really bad about ourselves, some of us may even start believing that the very core of our being is rotten. However, in our more rational moments, we know that this is not so. St. Teresa's vision was that outside the crystal castle was where all the venomous creatures lived, all those things that she called sinful. And she saw that as we begin a journey inward, the journey leading toward the center of our souls. We have to begin in the rooms that are adjacent to this outside world, the outside world that's filled with awful things. These rooms on the periphery, she says, are the furthest away from the source of light, and therefore are cold and filled with shadow. And everything going on outside the castle tempts us, makes us forget the inner light, makes us lose our way. But she says there are ways of transforming our lives, ways of moving just a little closer to that light. That spiritual journey inward, she says, begins with prayer, with meditation, and as the individual begins receiving more information, as she says, through sermons, through conversations, and keeping company with good people, one's life begins to be transformed. And eventually, she says, one will start living an exemplary life filled with virtue, acts of charity, prudence, discretion, and discipline. Now, these may not be the words that we would use, but at the same time, I know that for me, when I'm more consistent with filling my home with music and beauty, when I'm able to be more consistent in spending time out in nature, when I'm able to be more consistent in filling my life with friends and family who I care about, and I'm able to be more in touch with the best parts of myself. Those rooms within my soul are a little closer to the source of light. And it's during those times that I'm reminded that I'm not a bad person at the core, but that I'm good. That there is purity of intent, a purity of love that resides within me, as much as I might lose sight of that at times. It seems to me that this time of year lends itself to thinking more seriously about this inward journey. For as the solstice approaches, as the days grow short and the nights grow long, as the air becomes crisp, the impulse to shut out the world outside grows ever stronger. It's a time to pile logs into the fireplace and place candles in the window. It's a time for hot mulled cider on the stove. It's a time to get out those fur-lined slippers and wrap a comforter around our shoulders. settle down in a favorite chair and spend the evening with music or poetry, spending time with those we love. And there's a certain comfort as the dark descends. As T. Ed Eliot says, in our rhythm of earthly light, we tire of light. We are glad when the day ends, when play ends, and ecstasy is too much pain. We are children quickly tired, children who are up in the night and fall asleep when the rocket is fired and the day is long for work or play. We tire of distraction or concentration. We sleep and are glad to sleep, controlled by the rhythm of blood and the day and the night and the seasons. And we must extinguish the candle, put out the light and relight it. Forever must quench, forever relight the flame. Therefore we thank thee for our little light that is dappled with shadow. Now, T.S. Eliot seems to be saying that most of us human beings, absorbed as we are in this earthly life of ours, we cannot remain in the light always. We welcome the coming of the dark when the day ends, when play ends. And yet, he says that it is in the darkness that we are reminded of the light, the invisible light that guides us toward building, finding, forming. And it is to this invisible light that he offers his praise and thanks. So may each of us remember as the darkness envelops us, as our lives remain dappled with shadow, that there is a light, an invisible light within this crystal globe of our soul. Each of us remember that at the center of our being, there is a potential for infinite goodness, for infinite love, because this is where the most holy part of ourselves reside, here in this innermost room, the room that is waiting to be discovered. So may it be. Amen.